Grab a Bible if you've got one. We hope if you don't, there's one in the pew in front of you. So you can grab that and find First Chronicles, chapter 21, and we'll go back there in just a moment. But I did want to mention one thing by way of clarity. I hope it wasn't unclear to you, but I thought I might at least say this. We're very excited about this ministry called Accepting Grace, which is a support group for people with family members struggling with same-sex attraction and gender identity. Understand that we are not promoting those things. We are trying to correct those things. We think that that God made mankind male and female. There's only two genders, not three or four or 50. And that marriage is designed for one male, one female, and no spares. So we're trying to give a place where people can be helped in terms of that whole very challenging issue. So, secondly, thank you, my dear Vanna. If you're new to Grace Evan, let me tell you what we do. I'm in a series that I've been in for about 5 years now called Great Chapters. We choose a great chapter, and there are many in this book, and we work through that chapter, and we try to alternate between Old Testament and New Testament. We're in an Old Testament passage. It's a story about David, the psalmist, the shepherd boy of Israel, who, as king of Israel, ordered a census. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been there because the last week I was with you, we had communion, and then last week I was with the college-age students at Destin. So it's the story about David ordering a census that was prompted by his own pride. It displeased God. That's right in the text. God was displeased. And there were 70,000 lives that were lost as a result. That story is coming to an end, and we're at the portion beginning at verse 20. I'll read through verse 24 as we continue our study of this great chapter, and Lord willing, we'll wind it up next week. But the text reads like this. We're right in the middle of it, or jumping into the middle of a paragraph, and it reads like this. Now Ornan was threshing wheat. He turned and saw the angel, and his 4 sons who were with him hid themselves. As David came to Ornan, Ornan looked and saw David and went out from the threshing floor and paid homage to David with his face to the ground. And David said to Ornan, "Give me the site of the threshing floor that I may build on it an altar to the Lord. Give it to me at its full price, that the plague may be averted from the people." Then Ornan said to David, "Take it, and let my lord the king do what seems good to him. See, I give the oxen for the burnt offerings, and the threshing sledges for the wood, and the wheat for a grain offering. I give it all." But King David said to Ornan, "No, but I will buy them for the full price. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, nor offer burnt offerings that cost me nothing." The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God, this word, this endures forever. Guys, I'm going to focus your attention on verse 24 this morning. What would you have me say about it? About I will not take what is yours and offer it to the Lord, nor will I offer to the Lord something that costs me nothing. What would you like for me to say about that? Maybe we could gloss over it. Maybe we could ignore it. Maybe we could just skip it. I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that statement in verse 24 has embedded within it the very heartbeat of the Christian message. That there is in that text, verse 24, the gospel in seminal form. It has applications galore. What it faces us with is a very searching question. And the question as we begin is this: what do I offer to God? Do I give him, the time that, I'm really bored anyway, and I don't have any fun planned for that time period. I'll do something there. Do I give him monies that are left over that I don't need? That is, if there's anything left over at all. I'll just give him what I don't need. Guys, you do know, don't you, that the subject of the whole book of Malachi is that very item. Gang, the book of Malachi, I bet you've been in a Bible study on Malachi before. I bet you've heard sermons on Malachi before. But the theme of the book, let me just, this is in chapter 1. You don't need to turn there. You can if you want. Malachi, last book in the Old Testament, right before Matthew. So if you find Matthew, you just go left one book, and there it is. This is in Malachi chapter 1. This is a problem that existed in Israel. And it says, but you say, how have we despised your name? That is, God turns to Israel and says, you've despised my name. And Israel replies, wait a minute. How have we despised your name? And then God replies, by offering polluted food upon my altar. They took stuff that was already rotten. But you say, how have we polluted you? By saying that the Lord's table may be despised. When you offer blind animals in sacrifice, is that not evil? And when you offer those that are lame or sick, is that not evil? Present that to your governor. Will he accept you or show you favor, says the Lord of hosts? Do you see what was going on in Israel? Here's a story. I've heard it 50 times, and it was cute the first 10. But here's number 51, if you've never heard this before. It was about a farmer who owned 2 cows. And he said to his wife, because he was moved by God, he said, I'm gonna give one of those cows to God. And his wife said, well, that's wonderful, honey. And so they went to bed and got up the next morning, and one of the cows had died. And the farmer said to his wife, honey, God's cow died. Well, some of you haven't heard it. Do you see, let me give to God what is absolutely worthless. It doesn't mean anything to me. I don't need it. It's blind, it's sick, it's polluted. That's what I'll give to him. Folks, the principle that is wrapped up in verse 24, the principle is that which costs me nothing is before God worth nothing. Guys, this statement is so profound. It articulates a general principle of universal validity, I think. But the principle is simply, it is unacceptable to God to offer, and he will not accept, gifts of sacrifice which cost me nothing. I'll say it a little bit differently. The value of the gift depends on the self-denial required to give it. Now, gang, there are two halves of this text. The first half has to do what David is willing to give to God as a sacrifice. The other half of the idea here is I'm not going to take from Ornan what is Ornan's and try to offer that and call it mine. So there are two things at play here. What I will ultimately sacrifice to the Lord, and I'm not about to take something that is somebody else's and call it mine and offer that. You know, guys, I wonder if this thought has ever grabbed you. About 25 years ago now, I forget exactly the year that we entered this sanctuary, but it was, I think it was 2001. But so let's say 25 years ago, when we were building this thing, it almost killed me building it or being the pastor when it was being built. And I remember that there was one family, a young family who had 3 small kids. And the 3 small kids were really after their daddy. He was a man of means. And the children were after daddy to put in a pool. You know, daddy, you need to put in a pool in the backyard. And the daddy said to his 3 children, we are not going to build a pool. We're going to build a sanctuary. Has this thought ever grabbed you? That as you come in here, those who've been added in the last 20, 25 years or so, that you are enjoying all the comforts of home based on the sacrifices of others? You see, David was unwilling to do that. I am not going to offer to God the sacrifice that Ornan just offered me. I'm not going to do that. Gang, verse 24 brings us face to face with the issue of self-denial. That the value of a gift is determined by the degree of self-denial required to give it. Gang, you know this principle. It's not just, Jesus taught it. Remember, it's in Matthew 12, I think. He was in the temple and he was watching people give. And these fancy rich folk came in and dumped in bunches, and then this little widow came up. And she had 2 copper coins that weren't worth a penny or something like that. And Jesus remarks, this widow has given more than the rest of those folks. Why? Well, because of this principle. The principle is that the value of the gift is determined by the degree of sacrifice required to give it. What did it require of this little woman, this little widow? Well, a huge amount of self-sacrifice to give it away. Gang, I hope you can see that in the mind of David, not all giving is approved by God. Gang, I would say to you that in this statement in verse 24 is the essence of the gospel. What do I mean? Well, gang, what do we see God do in providing redemption? I bet you know this one. For God so loved the world that he made a proclamation about forgiveness. That God so loved the world that he sent what was left over from the banquet. God so loved the world that he gave. What did he give? He gave that was most precious to him. What is it that God did to save people like us? He sacrificed his son. He sacrificed something that was very valuable to him. He didn't make a proclamation. He made a sacrifice. Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, according to this, that which costs nothing is in heaven worth nothing. And I would point this out too, in terms of this being a gospel presentation in verse 24. I want you to notice that it was at this altar where this sacrifice was made that God came down with fire. It was at this altar where sacrifice was made that the sword that had taken 70,000 lives, the sword was sheathed. Because you see, sacrifice is honored. Gang, I don't offer someone else's self-denial. I must bring my own. I don't offer Ornan's. I don't offer what belongs to Ornan and call it my own. I don't worship at somebody else's expense. I am not looking for the way that I can offer, if I can worship the most cheaply. Folks, isn't this the essence of stealing? That I want to get something for nothing? I want that, but I don't want to pay for that. Folks, for David to have offered for David to have accepted Ornan's offer would have allowed David to perform a religious service that was cost-free, cheap, inexpensive. It wouldn't even have been David's. It would have been Ornan's. Am I going to offer to something that I got from Ornan? Am I going to offer to God something that cost me nothing? Because that's what this text is about, ladies and gentlemen. David says, I ain't doing that. I'm not going to take Ornan's offer and then call it mine and try to calm my troubled heart by acting like I just did a big deal. No. In fact, when I read the text, I tried to really land on the word no. No, I won't do that. I will not offer to the Lord something that cost me nothing. Gang, and this principle applies to a whole lot more than just money. It applies to the use of your spiritual gifts. It applies to your allocation of time. You know, I'm not sure this is a good illustration, but Susie and I had 3 girls. They're, of course, women now, but back when they were little, I was the head of my home, and I was committed to sex education in the home as long as Susie did it. Our girls got sex education, but it cost me nothing. Did y'all hear that news story this week? It happened in Shelby County. It was an active shooter in a Walmart. I think it was on Witten Road. I think that's right. It was an active shooter. And he apparently came in looking for someone who had jilted him or something. So he was only looking for one person. And so when the police arrived and they were all trying to, isolate the shooter and keep everybody safe, several of the shoppers decided to fill their grocery cart things with a bunch of stuff and run out without paying. Doesn't that infuriate you? But folks, is that what we try to do with our worship? Want to get somebody else's? Call it my own? And could that apply, this principle, could it conceivably apply to our kids' Christian education? Yeah, absolutely. When I come to church, I want my kids to hear about Jesus. I want them to get a Christian education. I want them to hear, I want them to be taught the Bible. I don't want them singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer at Christmas time. I want my kids educated, as long as somebody else is going to do it. Guys, I don't think the name Thomas Manton is particularly widely known in the Christian community. Thomas Manton was an old Puritan. He was probably most in print of all the Puritans. I've got a series of his books on the Ten Commandments, and I've got a series of his books on the Lord's Prayer. So Thomas Manton is often quoted by others, and Thomas Manton said this, or asked this, or said this, whatever. He said, and I'm quoting, "If all Christians would put this question seriously to their souls, shall I serve God with that which cost me nothing?" Let me just give you 20 seconds to put that to as he asked. Shall I serve God with that which cost me nothing? Oh, I want to serve God, but with the least possible expenditure. Oh yeah, Dr. Young, I want to have a religious dimension to my life. I just don't want it to cost me anything. Folks, I think we all know this. I think we would all agree about this. But real religion, the essence of real religion is moving away from self towards God. That's a principle that's at the center of Christianity. I'm moving away from self towards God more and more. That's one of the reasons that I'm so uncomfortable with the word self-esteem, because any word that begins with self ought to be something that makes us nervous. Because the essence of Christianity is moving away from self and towards God. So if that moving away from self is not happening in this issue of my worship, then it's costing me nothing, and it is worth nothing. Let me close by trying to identify what I think are David's four motives in this little statement in verse 24. His four motives for his worship. Four things that, the text doesn't mention them. I think they're there, so bear with me. Number one of his motives is his reverence for God. And by that I mean this. David had just watched God strike 70,000 people down. What do you think were his thoughts about God at that point? How big is this God to us? Well, to David at that moment, he's one who in a matter of hours could strike down 70,000 people. And so the idea of 700 shekels of silver or gold, whatever it was, of gold, 600 shekels of gold, what does that mean before a God who just struck down 70,000 people? It means nothing. You see, folks, human stuff gets smaller as God gets bigger. And so, as I'm moving away from self towards God, God is getting bigger and bigger, and I'm getting smaller and smaller. One of the things that evokes this kind of statement on the part of David is his reverence for this God. Secondly, a second motive is gratitude. David is the one that ordered this census. He was the one who was responsible for that census. And as a result of David's own pride that we've seen in a couple of weeks ago, because of David's pride, 70,000 lives were lost. He's guilty. And yet he is offered an undeserved forgiveness. I am forgiven, and I didn't deserve it. What's that worth to you? J.C. Ryle, one of my heroes, J.C. Ryle said that the Christian's most prized possession is forgiveness. And we're going to realize that one day. Maybe not so much today, but one day to stand and being told we're forgiven. So David is dealing with his own sense of forgiveness. This is what I caused. This is what I did. I'm guilty. And then a third motive. Folks, I said earlier at the beginning that this text really has two halves to it. The first half is, I am not going to offer what belongs to Ornan and call it mine. I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to offer to God something that costs me nothing. So there's this issue of Ornan. So part of David's motive was fairness to other people. David understands that if I don't do my share, then someone else is going to have to make up for me. Folks, what I offer to God must involve a death to self, and I must not ask Ornan to sacrifice for me. Gang, you've heard of this before. It's in all kinds of management books, and I've mentioned it before in here. It's called the Pareto principle. It's identified in industry. It's called the 20-80 rule, that 20% of the people are bearing 80% of the load. I'm telling you, I find that, I just can't bring myself to believe that in the church, we've got, what it means is we've got 20% Ornans and 80% I'll take advantage of Ornan. Surely not. Surely not. Can it be said of us? Could it? Is it? Is it true? Because David says, oh, well, if I don't do my share, Ornan's going to have to do it for me. What I give to God, whether it's resource or talents or time, and because I belong to Jesus Christ, some of that's going to be given. I'm not going to rely on Ornan to give it for me. I'm not going to let Ornan make up for me. And then finally, the final motive of the four was David's elementary understanding of the gift that God would give in Christ. He gives voice to that in Psalm 22. But you see, the sacrifice, the cost of redemption, the cost of saving people like us, required this sacrifice, that is, the sending of my own son. Because you see, if it doesn't cost something, it isn't worth anything. So what is the most costly gift I can give so that Jimmy Young can be saved? My son. And ladies and gentlemen, I say to you, whatever sacrifices I make or we make or you make are to be reflective of that sacrifice made by God. So, what does the gift of God's Son mean to me? How much self has died in me in light of God's sacrifice for me? Maybe I should have just skipped this text.